Nearly half of all the homeless people living in the streets in America happen to live in the state of California. What they are doing to our beautiful California is a disgrace to our country. It's a shame. The world is looking at it. Look at Los Angeles with the tents and the horrible, horrible, disgusting conditions.
Homelessness, a horrific reality that we as a society have accepted as normal and inevitable. Homeless individuals in their encampments are a common sight across the entire nation. But despite the transparent difference in class and quality of life between those who have shelter and those who do not, our society has chosen to consistently look the other way without questioning why homelessness exists or what underlying institutional issues create extreme poverty and homelessness. Currently, in the United States, there are more than 560,000 people experiencing homelessness. And although African Americans only take up 13% of the entire US population, 40% of all homeless in the United States are African Americans. And in Los Angeles, there are currently more than 66,000 individuals experiencing homelessness. Homelessness rates in Los Angeles have also been rising in the past years. And despite taking up only 8% of the total population in Los Angeles, African Americans take up 42% of LA's homeless population. Homelessness is often said to be the individual's fault. Whether it be laziness or drug addiction, our society casts the blame on the homeless individuals themselves and not the existing system that produces extreme poverty. So then, what are the actual causes of homelessness? Research has shown that the homeless are not victims of their own fault, but rather victims of an economic system that creates extreme poverty. Repeated comprehensive research of causes of homelessness from the National Law Center of Homelessness and Poverty concludes the following as the primary causes of homelessness, in order of most common reason to the least common reason. The cost of living in Los Angeles, one of the most expensive cities to live in the United States, places an overwhelming amount of financial pressure to working class families and individuals. About 50% of Los Angeles residents spend more than 30% of their income on rent, and about 25% of Los Angeles residents spend more than half their income on rent. Oftentimes, having a job is not enough to save you from losing your home. A study published by UCLA found that 74% of the homeless population in California had income prior to being homeless. Youth homelessness also reflects a disproportionate trend. An estimated 4.2 million youth face homelessness each year in the United States, and 40% of the youth who experience homelessness identify as a member of the LGBTQ community. To get a better understanding of what it means to be unsheltered, I talked with Theo Henderson, an unsheltered activist who hosts the podcast We the Unhoused.
Well, first of all, my name is Theo Henderson and I am unhoused. I have been unhoused for 7 years, and it was due to me being ill and unable to pay for the medical medicine that I needed and the climbing rents during the Great Recession. I did not just magically go into houselessness. It was a gradual decline like many 60,000 unhoused people. What I have learned about that experience, as well as the COVID-19 experience, is that there is very little education on what it means to be unhoused and how it impacts for housed members, because housed members' reality is not the unhoused reality. That's one of the things why I created We the Unhoused, because I got very irritated. Because one, and I'm not trying to single myself out, I'm a college-educated man, and every time, without fail, there's always someone that listens to my story and always wants to jump in like a moron, as if I'm not intelligent enough to think of this myself. Well, why couldn't you just find a job? Well, if you just do this and this and this. So it's always the understanding that it's your fault. And it's a very irritating thing, because if I'm intelligent enough to be out here and unhoused and I'm explaining my situation to you, contrary to popular belief, many unhoused people are intelligent enough to be able to try to find ways to navigate out of the system. It is not like they don't want to get help. It is not that they are choosing to be out here. Some of them give up because of the ridiculousness of the hoops they have to jump, or the antipathy that people don't ever want to talk about of housed people that infiltrate themselves on unhoused people. They put their opinions and their negative ideas about unhoused people, and it gets a pain in the neck, to put it mildly. And in respect to my situation, when I tell them I'm disabled, they look at this a disability, which is another conversation, and I talk with some of the disabled unhoused people about visible and invisible disabilities, and it makes you want to punch. I'm just not to call it violent. It makes you want to punch the ignorance, because just because I can be able to talk, I look like I'm mobile, does not mean I don't have a disability. And you should not have to explain myself or be judged on how disabled I am. I don't have to show a certain a broken leg or a neck or my surgical wounds or things like that to explain why I'm unhoused and I'm unable to get treatment, or I'm waiting on my SSI check and things like that. I should not have to do that. Our society should not be a blaming and shaming society, and that is what we are.
I also talked to Jane Nguyen, an activist and co-founder of KTown for All, an organization that was formed as a response to the protests against a plan to build a homeless shelter in Koreatown, Los Angeles in 2018.
So KTown for All is a community-based organization, completely volunteer-run, based in Koreatown, Los Angeles. And we were created during May 2018 when there was a homeless shelter was being proposed in the neighborhood of Koreatown, and there were protests against it. And so we emerged out of the counter protest. So we supported the homeless shelter. And since then, we've been doing outreach to our unhoused neighbors and doing a lot of political and policy advocacy to end homelessness and end the criminalization of homelessness.
Criminalization of homelessness. It is painful to imagine a world where the poorest of the poor are the ones constantly targeted and harassed by law enforcement. But this is a daily reality for the homeless in the United States.
Well, to give you a grounding, because house people have to have a grounding. When things go wrong, they have this deification. They make it as the police officers are angels. If there's a problem, that is the first person that they call, the police. As for the unhoused people, you have to understand, if an unhoused person is by your place or living or trying to survive, that is the first person that they call. And the interaction is when the Los Angeles Times made an article about the high increased interactions of use of force against unhoused people. When they say use of force, they're not talking about when unhoused people are just trying to live and you're coming and bothering them, or you're slamming them or displacing them, and they're upset. They're making it sound like he's just crazy and he's just being violent. But I submit to you that if I was to kick in your door at maybe 2 or 3 in the morning, or whatever time in the morning that you're sleeping or having to sleep in, and tell you have 5 or 6 minutes to move your stuff, and you are arguing while I got people with garbage cans and things that dumping all of your belonging in a garbage can, and tell you that you're not moving fast enough, or have you slammed against the wall to check that you have any outstanding warrants for maybe being homeless or whatever it is, or vagrancy or things like that, I guarantee you your perspective will change.
And it wasn't until I started talking to my unhoused neighbors in Koreatown that I realized that not only does the local government neglect to provide basic services and hygiene and sanitation services, they also make it they actively harm people, and they make it hard for people to get into housing. Because the primary response to homelessness in LA is to criminalize people. So LA has a practice of doing sweeps, which is going to encampments and just taking people's stuff and trying to clear them away. So that is really harmful to people's path out of homelessness, and it just makes it so difficult for people to connect to services and get into housing.
A nationwide survey of 187 American cities from the National Law Center on Homelessness and Poverty found these startling facts. Researchers say that sweeps are extremely devastating and an inefficient use of public money, as homeless people affected by sweeps often lose survival gear, identification, and/or other important legal documents, medications, and irreplaceable
You had
money.
no reason touching your stuff. No reason.
They want this all cleaned out, so it's not an eyesore to them, nor a space sore, so that the middle, and upper middle income people who might feel uncomfortable in my presence, or the presence of other people who are houseless. But I'm a human being.
In August 2019, the Boston Police Department, as part of Operation Clean Sweep, seized 3 wheelchairs and crushed them in the back of a garbage truck before ordering their homeless owners away from the Boston Medical Center. LA spends $31 million on sweeps annually. In Ocala, Florida, as part of Operation Street Sweeper, 3 arrested homeless individuals collectively spent 210 days in jail and were fined over $9,000 based on only trespassing and unlawful lodging alone.
The health department is speaking out tonight after it poured bleach on food at a local group's event meant to feed the homeless.
And in Kansas City, health department officials poured bleach on chili, soup, and sandwiches being offered to the homeless residents by the organization Free Hot Soup.
Every aspect of homelessness can be criminalized. There are so many ordinances that regulate how you operate in public space. So, for example, there's 5611, which says that you have to have no more than 60 gallons in public. And 60 gallons seems like a really weird, arbitrary number, but it's the exact volume of a garbage can. So that's what the city thinks about people's belongings. And then along with that is you can't have your tent up during the day. So right now it's not being as enforced as it was before, but there are like a number of other ordinances too that make it possible for police to stop and harass people just because they're violating all of these totally obscure ordinances. 4118 is still on the books, and that says that you can't sit, sleep, or lie down on the sidewalk. So even though that's not enforceable due to a recent federal court ruling, it's still a law that we have in the city. And so it makes it very easy for the police to just stop anyone who looks poor, or who doesn't have a home. And they can justify it by, this whole list of ordinances. There are some really ridiculous ones too, like you can't have a milk crate, or and there are laws that govern how you can use different public spaces like parks, beaches. And all of those different areas of public space have their own regulations. So yeah, it's really difficult to not break the law if you're homeless. In fact, I would argue that it's impossible to not be in violation of civil codes if you're homeless.
The police are not for everybody. They are selectively used by people that have money, people that have prejudice against unhoused people, and people that have the notion that police officers are just doing their job. Many rank and file police officers love to use that notion to unsuspecting people because they know that they're not going to question that narrative. They know that most people that are housed are not going to have that interaction unless you're a person of color. on the wings of that, I'm talking about the incidents that happened in Minneapolis. That is an example of many instances that happens here in Los Angeles. That is many instances that happens across the world. But we still have recalcitrant people that refuse to believe. They will always try to find a way to blame and shame the person getting killed or shot or things like that. If a person is breaking the law, it is not the job of the police officers to be judge and jury. If the person is resisting, it is not the job of the police officers to kill a person. There's a court system, and whether you're housed or unhoused, or a person of color, or whatever station in life that you are in, you do not get the right to justify and give support to a abusive practice, an abusive system. So when you hear those good officers that people love to tout, where are those good officers when those things happen? Where are those good officers when they speak out about it? I can tell you where the bad officers are. They're in those business improvement district meetings giving horrible, nasty statements about unhoused people. I can tell you where the neighborhood prosecutor is when they're going out there vilifying unhoused people and looking every way and every ordinance and every law to make sure that their time is put up in jail time. I can tell you where they are. And they are in business improvement district neighborhoods. They're in those neighborhood councils. These criminals, and I want to really point this out because house people need to stop this nonsense of thinking criminals are people that look dirty. Neighborhood council members that go against and do hostile and vigilante things to unhoused people are criminals. They're thugs. Police officers that look nice and with spit shine uniforms are thugs that use, if you're going and using them to weaponize against unhoused people, you are a criminal and you are a thug and you should be locked up. I have no sympathy for you. I'm not trying to understand because you do not understand that unhoused, being poor is not a crime. That's one of the things I wanted to say.
And even though the role of the police in public housing only makes the lives of the homeless more difficult, police departments from all across the United States receive more and more funding each year, while social services get less and less. On top of a police department that receives more than half of the city's annual budget, Los Angeles is also home to the largest school police department in the country.
Protesters, including LAUSD teachers and students.
The Los Angeles School Police Department, with its budget of $70 million, has a mine-resistant tank, 61 M16 rifles, and until 2014, 3 grenade launchers. Why does a school police force need military equipment? Why is there even a school police force in the first place? A recent research published from UCLA analyzed how the Los Angeles School Police Department has been behaving in the past years. The study published shocking findings. Between 2014 and 2017, the LASPD made 3,389 arrests and issued 2,724 citations and 1,282 diversions to students. 1 in 4 students arrested were elementary or middle school children. And despite making up only 6% of the student population, 25% of arrests were from Black youth. Research from the CDC found that the rates of youth delinquency is similar among different races, with some acts actually being higher in white students, like sexual assault and bullying. Yet, despite these facts, the LASPD is most active in minority community zip codes, resulting in students of color being disproportionately policed and arrested.
We begin tonight with startling new evidence that America's fight against the coronavirus is far from over, with 11 states reporting record numbers of new cases this weekend.
In early 2020, the United States was swept up in a storm by the global COVID-19 pandemic. Quarantine forced Americans out of their jobs, with many living paycheck to paycheck, not able to pay essential living costs. The United States demonstrated to the world of its systemic failures, as the government did not take the necessary public health procedures or provide adequate financial relief for its citizens. This pandemic made life even harder for the poorest of the poor.
I had been lodging at Alpine Recreation Center in Los Angeles, California. And to that, I also got injured during COVID-19. I injured my ankle. That made my mobility was very compromised. So I sheltered in place and a section of the park where, because there was nobody really occupying the park, to stay there. And I basically tried to heal until April 1st, when the city got together to eject me from the park due to Mayor Garcetti's shelter-in-place order of using 42 recreation centers to be occupied. Now, to be clear, that also offered up a potpourri of police presence. There was an excessive amount. They had a station there. Now it's only maybe 2 unmarked cars, but the whole idea, the whole impression was to insinuate that unhoused people were criminals for the NIMBY community. But the part of the problem as well is they had a very close relationship with the Los Angeles Police Department, who loves to pump or create the narrative that unhoused people are just basically violent, mentally ill, and they are a danger to everybody. And so those issues compiled to the point where I basically had took for some time to find a place to heal and to go in other locations to still get the story out of with unhoused people that are still dealing with the fact that there were no bathrooms for them to go to, that they're still dealing with in some places that they're going hungry at night. There's still places where they are not able to do the same things like house people, like wash their hands every 20 minutes, because some of the places that they were available don't have those facilities, or don't even have ample replenished supplies like running water and things of that nature.
So when COVID-19 first was an issue in Los Angeles, we as unpaid volunteers were really worried for our neighbors because it appeared that they hadn't even been informed about COVID-19 from government agencies. And so within the first few weeks, we were the only ones to inform them about COVID-19 and to tell them this is why everything is shut down, is because there's a pandemic. And a lot of people just had never even heard of it. And so they didn't know that they had to take all these precautions to wash their hands and to socially distance. And meanwhile, all of these social services were getting shut down. And so people lost access to food pantries and all of the social services that they were using before. So yeah, at the beginning, it was just a mad scramble from us as unpaid volunteer advocates to provide people with basic survival needs and to inform people of COVID-19 and to try to get hand washing stations out to people. So knowing how essential it is to keep your hands clean and to wash your hands regularly, we started making hand washing stations out of these water jugs that we ordered from Home Depot. And so it was up to us to make hand washing sinks to distribute at encampments because the city's response was so slow. And so for the first few weeks, people didn't have hand washing stations.
The Los Angeles city has treated unhoused people like they always treat unhoused people, and based on the recommendations and the tacit approval of the city council as criminals, as people that are children that don't have any agency. For example, Project Room Key has a police officer on each corner of the hallway, as if they are in prison or they are. Project Room Key has curfew. You have to be in the building by 7 o'clock. If you're not, you're going to be locked out your own room. So those things is not talked about because the nurses leave, but still, it's the impunitive behavior that constantly besets the unhoused community. That's one of the reasons why unhoused people don't want to go to shelters. The second thing is we need to talk about the abusive practices of how we look at unhoused people. We have to create a penitentiary kind of system like that. And then when they don't want to go to these penitentiary kind of systems, we say we don't want the help. They don't want the help. So that's part of the problem too. So once we get into the 2020 and realize shelter and what help really is like for the city to help us truly by giving us supportive housing, make sure the places are maintained. Just because we get into a place don't mean that you're done and just let the stuff become dilapidated or asbestos infested so we don't want those kind of things. We want the same kind of humanity and respect as housed residents do. And we should not be judged because we work harder or we don't work or this kind of thing, because a lot of times being unhoused in the first place ain't got nothing to do with jobs in the first place. So, I can't tell someone that's in the house or unhoused, well, you need to get a job and he's taking chemotherapy. Come on. Or he's going, he can barely walk. We have, as housed people, we have been really educated poorly.
Homelessness and poverty are not impossible issues with no visible solution. The United States, as the richest nation in the world, can fix homelessness if our abundant wealth is used for services that benefit those in need instead of more wars and a more militarized police. This misuse of taxpayer money is by no means a mistake or accident. Our capitalist system and government purposely prioritizes profit over people by protecting the property of the wealthy over the human rights of those who are struggling to survive. So what can we, as average citizens, do to create change? We can actively support and attend movements that hit the streets to demand change. We can educate ourselves and those around us for a more conscious and moral society. We as a people are the only ones who can bring about change, because if the rich, with all their wealth, wanted to fix these issues, they would have done so a long time ago. And as a people, our best weapon against this oppressive system is our unity and solidarity. As Assata Shakur once said, "It is our duty to fight for our freedom. It is our duty to win. We must love each other and support each other. We have nothing to lose but our chains."